On January 2nd, 1969, a new play opened at the Cherry Lane Theater in New York. It was called To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. About 5 months later, Howard and Lee, who happened to be all of those things, spoke to the people of his adopted hometown, Chapel Hill. He said, "First, let me thank you for the opportunity of being your mayor. I promise to do everything within my power to live up to your expectations and to demonstrate that I am worthy of your faith and trust in me as a leader and as your mayor." And then he expressed his, and I quote, "sense of responsibility to and for the total community." The lives of Lillian and Howard and their children, Angela and Ricky, would never be the same, nor would the office of the mayor, nor would the town of Chapel Hill, nor would many significant aspects of the state of North Carolina. That journey began 50 years ago, and it continues on today, particularly in the critical field of educational achievement and empowerment. So this evening, we have gathered here to say thank you. My name is Reg Hildebrand. I am very, very honored to be a part of this program that will begin now with words of welcome from Richard Ellington of the Chapel Hill Historical Society, and then from Reverend Marcus McCall, the senior pastor of this church, St. Baptist, that has been an important part of the lives and the strength of the Lee family.
Good evening. Welcome to you all. The Chapel Hill Historical Society welcomes all of you to this very special presentation and celebration. I'm Richard Ellington, Vice President of the Chapel Hill Historical Society. Our President, Sarah Gear, was supposed to be doing this, but she is home recuperating from a knee operation. So I had to fill the breach. This year, as we in Chapel Hill celebrate its 200th anniversary, I don't know if many people are aware of that, but in 1819, Chapel Hill was actually incorporated as a town. The Chapel Hill Historical Society has already celebrated our 50th plus, but we're also, of course, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Mayor Lee becoming mayor of Chapel Hill. We've been, for the last 50 plus years, we've been watching over and recording the history of this town, such as Mayor Lee's election. If you're not a member of our society, we invite you to become a part of it, of our organization. Tonight, we have some, at the back table, we have some brochures that you may pick up if you'd like on your way out. And we have, I hope that you will avail yourself of them. We also have an array of books. You can see some of the publications that we have put out. The most recent being a reprint and an update of John Alcott's book entitled for the Architecture and Art of the Campus that was originally published by the Society in 1986. And we have updated and republished it, and it's been reissued, and we have copies back there that you can look at. Our next meeting is our annual Community Treasures celebration, where we honor folks in our community who have been here for many years and have made significant contributions to the community of Chapel Hill and the greater community that surrounds us. This next meeting will be on November 17th, 3 o'clock, in the Chapel Hill Public Library Meeting Room B, and we hope to see you there. I would like to introduce the Reverend Marcus McCall.
Good evening, and I just need to begin by saying, don't they look natural? They just look I want to welcome all of you who are connected to the Chapel Hill Historical Society, guests and friends, in this celebration of the two of the best members of this congregation, Lillian and Howard Lee. I'm Marcus McFall, one of the ministers here, and this is where Binkley Church, where the Lees have sojourned in this faith community for several decades. So on behalf of our congregation, staff, and particularly our pastor emeritus, Bob Seymour, who is with us tonight at age 94. We think this is an appropriate place for this wonderful celebration. When you come from Lithonia and Savannah, Georgia, and you accomplish all that you have accomplished, when you have and give character and strength to a family, to a town, to a city, to a state, and to a region, you have made history. So the two of you have made all of us better people. And we love you. Howard's fond of saying that when they moved to Chapel Hill, he got here before Lillian did, and he was tasked with finding them a church. And so he came to Binkley, and he heard strong prophetic preaching from Dr. Seymour. And so with great excitement, he told Lillian, I found a church. And the services are 1 hour. We're going to try to keep that true, Howard.
Thank you, Reverend McFall, and it is always an honor and an inspiration to be in the presence of Reverend Seymour. Glad to see you here. Coming now with words of tribute about the political legacy of Howard Lee are two outstanding public servants. Even though they are young, I have known both of them for a long time, and I admire and respect the work they are doing and the legacies they are creating themselves. They are first Alan Wensley, a member of the Chapel Hill Town Council, and then we will hear from State Senator Valerie Foushee. And following Senator Foushee's remarks, there will be a brief video tribute. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Alan Wensley. I'm a member of the Chapel Hill Town Council. This is a very special moment for me personally because I grew up idolizing Mr. Lee and Mrs. Lee. I want to thank Dr. Hildebrand. I want to thank Sarah Geer, who couldn't be here with us tonight. I want to thank Mr. Richard Ellington, the Chapel Hill Historical Society. I want to thank the town of Chapel Hill, Clayton Weaver, Angela Lee, and Binkley Baptist Church for hosting this momentous occasion. This is the right time to have this recognition. And I'm honored to have the privilege to say a few words about Mr. and Mrs. Lee's historic victory on May 6, 1969, because, we can't say one without the other. Any? So without Mrs. Lee's support and leadership, this historic moment would not have happened 50 years ago. So like I said before, I grew up idolizing these two. When I was about 12 years old, I remember I was at Ivy Phillips Middle School, and I just read about their historic victory in a history textbook. It was the North Carolina State History textbook back in 7th grade.
And this was about a year and a half after my mother had moved us down to North Carolina. And I remember seeing a photo of Mayor Lee, and he was sitting at a microphone talking to the people. And I remember my eyes just kind of growing big because, you know, I knew that Chapel Hill was home to Tar Heels, but I didn't know at that time that Chapel Hill was home to history, to the kind of history where black people, young black people like me, could be inspired to dream of doing a public serving. And so they were able to shape the foundations at the time in a region, in a state that was really quite behind. And so when I said that this is the right time to recognize them, I say that because, you know, they came at the right time, they came at the right place, they came in the right kind of climate. And so I'm here to tell you just briefly about how that all went down. So for the more seasoned folks here, the older folks, some of this might sound, you know, like old news, so bear with me. For the younger folks, I want you to pay close attention. So in 1968, when the Lees decided to run for mayor, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had just been assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. The election of 1968 had just happened, that ushered in the Nixon administration. We were in the thick of the Vietnam War. Morale was very low, especially among young people. And despite the great advances we had in civil rights, we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we had the Fair Housing Act of 1968, we had the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We had a lot of great progress legally, but on the ground, in actuality, progress was very slow, and in a lot of cases, it was just non-existent, especially due to white flight, especially due to the withdrawal of resources from white communities from the public good, through schools, infrastructure, roads. So in Chapel Hill in 1968, you know, we had just kind of come through a decade of little to moderate progress. And we had come to that point really at a great cost. It took the lives, it took blood, sweat, tears of black residents committed to Dr. King's legacy and his dream. Despite the Brown decision back in 1954, the Chapel Hill School Board did not desegregate our schools until 1960. And school desegregation was not actually carried through in full until 1966, when Lincoln High School was closed and Chapel Hill High School was opened. And Mr. Lee had recently started a job at Duke University, and he was anxious for Chapel Hill to adopt an open housing ordinance to ensure that African Americans were treated fairly and equally in the housing market. He had come up against stiff resistance in his proposal to the then town council, which was actually at that time called the Chapel Hill Board of Aldermen. Kind of at every turn, when you would go to public comment, they gave him a stiff arm on that. And so, you know, he acknowledged that challenge and decided that, you know, he had to do something about it. And he even acknowledged in his book, Courage to Lead, that in 1968, he didn't think that an African-American man could win mayor. And he first started out by trying to convince a friend of his, Mr. Sewell, to run. He was a white man, a progressive man. He tried to convince him to run for office, but Mr. Sewell instead said, you know, not me, what about you? And at that point, Mr. Lee thought about it, and of course, he got the go-ahead from Mrs. Lee. But, like I said, he couldn't do it without her, and that included having her say so. But once he had her say so, they together went full steam ahead and tried to make history. He and Mrs. Lee made a formidable duo, but every duo needs a great team. And that team started right here at Binkley Baptist, with members Ann and Billy Barnes as they lent their knowledge of community organizing, their government experience under the anti-poverty program started by Governor Terry Sanford. They became the Lee's campaign managers. David Etheridge, an incumbent member of the Board of Aldermen, was part of the team. Mary Prothero, a progressive thinker. Reginald Lee Smith, an African-American community leader and educator. Other supporters included Rebecca Clark, Hilliard Caldwell, and of course, Louis Sewell. Mr. Lee's campaign priorities were the following, and these are going to sound very familiar. Affordable housing.
Yeah.
Affordable housing. That was one of the bedrock campaign priorities of Mr. Lee. Public transit. Mr. Lee was proposing at the time that Chapel Hill go ahead and create a public transit system. Business recruitment, to try to build up the commercial tax base. Investment in our parks and recreation, because Chapel Hill cares about its parks and making sure that we create as many trails and greenways as possible. So these priorities, what they did was not only kind of undergird his message and campaign, but they also drew in a diverse group of folks. They drew in African Americans, they drew in white folks, they drew in students, older folks. And so when I say that he came in at the right time, he also had the right vision. He had the vision of building a coalition between all these different disparate groups together so that they could accomplish the extraordinary. White conservatives at the time used everything they could to defeat the Lees. They pointed out his political inexperience. They said that he was unqualified because he was a black man, and they stoked up age-old racial stereotypes and tropes, playing upon the fears, the traditional fears of white folks about having black people in positions of power. They even tried to use the rivalry between UNC and Duke to undermine his credibility. The reason for that, you know, they were a little scared. But how did they respond? They responded with class. They responded by saying, to any question that they were presented with, I've got an answer for that. We see that on the presidential stage with Elizabeth Warren, who says, I have a plan for that. This man had a plan in response to any question that he was asked. He energized people. He was personable. He was just a very hard man to dislike once you got to meet him, once you got to hear him speak. And he offered hope for a new way of conducting town business. He wanted to draw in young people instead of maintaining things as status quo. So despite all those challenges, this man from Lithonia, Georgia, and this woman from Savannah, Georgia, they achieved a victory that rang bells all across the country. He carried the majority black district precincts, and he also carried a couple of large all-white precincts. So, you talk about coalition building, he was able to achieve that in 1960 at a time when the country was really ready to set the clock back. And so Mr. Lee went on to become the first black mayor of a predominantly white town, city in the American South, really since the end of Reconstruction. And that would not have happened had it not been for Mrs. Lee, had it not been for the young people out there, had it not been for the white folks who, thought better to expand their minds, expand their visions of what could be and what should be. And again, he's a personal inspiration to me, and I thank him.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
What an honor it is to be included in this wonderful tribute to two Chapel Hill treasures. Many thanks to the Chapel Hill Historical Society for organizing this celebration. So I've been fortunate to have known Senator Lee and his family since shortly after they moved to Chapel Hill. Ricky and Angela were schoolmates of mine, and I still have lunch with Mrs. Lee regularly. Senator Lee was mayor of Chapel Hill throughout our high school years, and I think it made all of us feel special that this history was made right here in our hometown in the South. So my task this evening is to highlight Senator Lee's service to our state. Senator Lee's service to the state began well before his election to the North Carolina Senate. From 1977 through 1981, he served as Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources and Community Development, a cabinet-level position in the Governor Jim Hunt administration. In 1990, he was elected to the North Carolina Senate. He was re-elected in 1992, 1996, and 1998. And during his tenure, he held several powerful committee chairmanships, presiding over education, transportation, and appropriations committees. In the Senate, he built a reputation as a fighter for education reform. He fought for higher teacher salaries, increased funding for public and higher education, and advocated for raising teacher and student standards. Additionally, he sponsored or co-sponsored several major pieces of educational legislation, which included Smart Start and More at 4, which is now known as NC Pre-K. NC Pre-K, the program requirements were designed to ensure that a high-quality pre-kindergarten classroom experience was provided for every 4-year-old child in local NC Pre-K programs, and that to the extent possible, uniformity would exist across the state for these programs. Senator Lee also sponsored the Excellent Schools Act for school reform and the Safe Schools Act that was designed to keep violence out of North Carolina's classrooms. On May 1st, 2003, the North Carolina State Board of Education elected Howard Lee as its chairman. He also served as a member of the North Carolina Utilities Commission, having been appointed by Governor Mike Easley on April 1st, 2005. And in 2009, Governor Bev Perdue appointed him as the new executive director of the North Carolina Education Cabinet, composed of leaders of public schools, community colleges, and public and private universities. He served in this position until 2011. Since 2011, he has spent most of his time as president of the Howard and Lillian Lee Institute, focused on developing initiatives in middle and high schools to increase the number of disadvantaged students, especially Black boys graduated from high school and prepared to succeed in a post-secondary institution, university, or community college. So I'll end my remarks by sharing this experience. In 2015, I was fortunate to travel to Tokyo, Japan, and Singapore with a delegation of North Carolina business people, policymakers, and educators for a summit on economic development and education. I met an elementary school teacher who, upon learning that I was from Chapel Hill, asked me if I knew Howard Lee. Well, of course I do, I said proudly. And she shared with me that she had met him a few years back. She was so inspired by him that she purchased his book, The Courage to Lead, One Man's Journey in Public Service. She said it changed not only her views on educating all children, but helped to change her views about life. And that, Senator and Mrs. Lee, is a legacy of which you can and should be proud of. And so we thank you for your leadership and your service to the great state of North Carolina. I remember how proud we were that Chapel Hill had a Black lady was an excellent for the young people. He served as a role model for many of us.
I think we were all excited, enthusiastic, having been elected first Black mayor of a city in the South.
Howard, as mayor, initiated some of the human services programs that Chapel Hill continues to support today. Howard has been
I'm sure
All right, a great deal of work went into that video, and they're trying to get it, the technology straightened out so that you will be able to hear and see it in the way it should be experienced. We'll come back to that later when they have the problems worked out. Moving on with the program. When Howard Lee was elected in 1969, the mayor of Chapel Hill was paid $100 per month. Had no budget and no staff, not even a desk or an office to put one in. The position that Mayor Pam Heminger now holds is a little different than that. And the increased significance, stature, and influence of the position of mayor is due largely to the efforts of Mr. Lee. You will now hear personal reflections from Mayor Heminger, and then from Congressman David Price, who, despite his heavy responsibilities in Washington, finds time to be an active member of this church. Following Congressman Price, we will hear from Mr. Walter Sturtevant, who you probably remember as a star member of championship UNC football teams or as a radio broadcaster, but he has another identity that is poignantly relevant for this occasion. Given the hard, discouraging, segregationist problems that the Lees had with realtors when they were trying to purchase their first home in this town, I think it is symbolically appropriate that Mr. Sturtevant has become a successful and respected real estate agent here in Chapel Hill. Mayor
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I just can't say how proud I am to see all of you here celebrate such a wonderful couple and to show how grateful we all are for how much they have done for our community, but how lucky we are that you chose to come. I also want to recognize we have a lot of elected officials in the audience, and I couldn't catch all of you, but if you would be willing to stand up if you're an elected official. I know I have town council members here, some school board members here. I think we have Representative Insco here, and here from Representative. Y'all stand up if you're elected officials. Since you're here. Past elected officials in the audience as well. This is a wonderful, wonderful gathering this evening to show our respect and gratitude. Since arriving in Chapel Hill over 55 years ago, Howard and Lillian have worked tirelessly to create an open and a fair community where everyone thrives. And we owe them a deep gratitude for all their service in everything they've done. This year, as you heard, Chapel Hill is celebrating our 200th birthday of town government. Our theme is 200 years of getting better together. And that came from Howard. He's always been a positive and eloquent spokesman for our community, and he's always represented the values that we share here together of openness, diversity, and inclusivity at the state level and everywhere he goes, as you heard around the globe. Tonight, I've been asked to share a few thoughts on Howard's service as our mayor and how his accomplishments during that time continue to shape our town is today. One of the defining characteristics of Howard's leadership that I really appreciate the most is the aspiration for the community to be great for all residents. And he set his sights from there. And his success is really due to his ability to bring people together to solve the issues, bringing people to the table so that all voices could be heard. I want to talk too about the bravery and courage that both of you endured. You overcame barriers by moving to this community and joined in a community that you had not grown up in, and you came here and you wanted to make a difference. We heard how you got involved in the church here, and then you chose to live in a neighborhood that had never seen an African-American family before. And I wish I could say they were welcomed, but one morning they woke up to find a cross burning on their front yard. But after that, I think things seemed to take shape a little bit better. People became less fearful as they got to know the Lees. This church community here, this faith-based, helped promote that, and people learned to just see each other for who they were and not by the color of their skin. I can't imagine how frightening that was, though. Moving here, having that happen, having your own family, feeling like there was a personal safety issue, and I'm just so proud that you chose to work through that. You didn't pick up and leave. You stayed here and you wanted to make a difference. That's impressive, and I know how hard it is to put yourself out there as mayor. I can't even imagine the journey you two. Throughout Howard's campaign, he led out a vision for our town. And upon taking office, he did a remarkable job of setting the stage for moving us all forward together. Important first steps included creating that mayor's office, very grateful for that, and making changes to the town, such as putting in the town budget and a path forward that we could all operate under. Again, very glad for that too. Persistence and collaboration. Many of us know that one of Howard's crowning achievements was the creation of our Chapel Hill Transit. Following the defeat of initial voter referendum, Howard continued to work with the university leadership, bringing the issue back before the voters a second time, and it passed. This year, Chapel Hill Transit provided over 7 million rides and is celebrating its 45th birthday. It's free. It's one of the largest systems, which is even after leaving the mayor's office, Howard continued to work on our behalf at the state level. Of his many roles, I know that both he and Lillian highly treasure their advocacy and work to improve the education in our community and our state. Making a difference in the lives of children through education has, of course, been Lillian's life work. And I want to recognize her contribution as the founder of the hospital school and service in the Chapel Hill Harbor City Schools. I don't know how many of you know about the hospital school system, but it welcomes children from all across the state who are here needing health services and helps them continue on with their education while they are at the hospital. So it serves not only our own community, but it welcomes families and children from all across the state. And that's huge as to who we are, welcoming people and believing in the value of education. I want to also say that Howard was one of the first people to reach out to me after I became mayor and offer his services if he could be needed. I appreciate that willingness, and I also know that Ms. Lillian did the same thing. About 2 months in, she called me up and she said, "I'm Lillian Lee, and I just want to give you a heads up before you step in it." It was a really good situation, and I was so grateful for that call before I did step in. So I appreciate your willingness and hearts to be here. As a mayor, I often challenge our youth to be the change you wish to see. And at times those words are more easily said than lived. But I think this couple actually embodies that. Through all of the hard work and all the things that you personally endured, the because of your dedication, because of your willingness to bring people together, you have made those changes. You have made us the community we are today. You put us on a better path. And we are so grateful that you helped shape this community and that you continue to do so in all the days forward. Thank you.
Good evening. Lisa and I first heard of Howard and Lillian Lee from the far reaches of New Haven, Connecticut. I left Chapel Hill in 1961 and took off for Yale Divinity School. And the Lees arrived here in 1964. But I kept up pretty well, largely through vaguely church circles, and in 1969, we heard and rejoiced in the remarkable news that Howard Lee had been elected mayor of Chapel Hill. I believe the first time I met Howard was in 1972. I was still in New Haven, but I was in the state doing advance work for Edmund Muskie. Remember him? Well, Howard was running for Congress that year in what was then the 2nd District, and that too was a path-breaking campaign. I distinctly remember a picture in the paper of Howard welcoming to the polls an aged African-American man who was last able to vote, who had last been able to vote 70 years earlier. Remember that? 70 years earlier, at the turn of the century, just before white supremacy and Jim Crow set in. We moved to Chapel Hill a year later, 1973, and that is when we got to know the Lees personally, in the community, in the church, in politics. Howard made a valiant run for the Democratic nomination for Lieutenant Governor in 1976. And we were campaigning together because I was breaking in as a campaign operative, trying to manage a couple of congressional districts for Jimmy Carter. Howard soon was appointed to the cabinet position, which others have mentioned, in which he served with great distinction. Jim Hunt's Secretary of Natural Resources and Community Development. And he became an important player in statewide politics. In the meantime, Lillian was establishing a children's school at Memorial Hospital. She was endearing herself to generations of students in the public schools and also at UNC. Howard then re-entered, and I entered electoral politics at about the same time. And the result of that for Howard was 5 distinguished terms in the North Carolina Senate. So our lives have been intertwined for about 40 years. Howard's influence still reverberated when Lisa put in service at Town Hall with a couple of mayors as their personal assistant. His influence lingered after his achievements were, as the present mayor has said, his achievements have benefited not just mayors, but the whole town since that time. I've been involved with Howard Lee for campaigns and causes that I could ever count. And I can testify to a few things. He's a man you want with you in the foxhole. He's always steady. He's almost always calm. And he's a man who has a really extraordinary and rare combination of prophetic vision and discerning judgment. That's what it takes, and Howard has those qualities to a remarkable degree. We feel very indebted to the Lees, grateful for what they've meant to us and to this community. I'm honored to be part of this cloud of witnesses testifying tonight as we honor and celebrate their service and look forward to many more years of enjoying their company and joining with them in good causes. Thank you.
agenda. I'm just going to tell a personal story because it means so much to me. They say character is who you are when nobody's watching. The words integrity and class have come to mean a lot to me as well over the years, over 35 years in broadcast media, in what I do now with real estate. Those three words are very important to me. My story. There was a young man, there was a young man in Hamlet, North Carolina, about 100 miles from here, Richmond County, rural North Carolina. And that young man had a little bit of athletic ability, had decent grades, was being recruited by Bill Dooley and Pat Watson to come play football at the University of North Carolina. That young man also was pretty widely recruited by the ACC and some national programs, and he almost wound up going to play football at University of Kansas. Because Kansas, the head coach, told that young man, Walter, we think you're the best I formation tailback east of the Mississippi. That's pretty heady stuff for an 18-year-old. Little did I find out later that they told everybody that. But I almost went to the University of Kansas. Why? Because of the height, because of, the coach was really pursuing me really hard. But there was one thing that kept standing out to me. It was Chapel Hill. What was it about Chapel Hill that was so darn special, that was so progressive and forward thinking, that was so ready to embrace a Howard Lee 6 or 7 years before I got here? Ultimately, that won out. I have admired this man, this woman, and their family for years and years. And eventually, it wasn't until much later when I came back to Chapel Hill that I actually got a chance to meet, I call him Mr. Howard, I call him Senator Lee, so I may call him both. That I actually got a chance to meet him. I was working with a urban theater project called the Forget Me Not Project that sought to create awareness about Alzheimer's disease, which is 2.5 times more likely to occur in African American communities. For no reason at all, simply because I asked. Mr. Lee chose to meet with me and help launch that project, along with Reverend Robert Seymour, who met with me as well. That project has now traveled for 12 years all over the country and been extremely successful because, and it's very rare that you get to meet your real living hero who winds up meeting with you for something like that. But it's because of Howard Lee and Robert Seymour. Thank you, John. Howard Lee, to a young man from rural North Carolina whose father died when he was 11 years old, gave me someone to emulate. His leadership, his strength, his personality, his integrity, his class, his character, gave me someone to want to be like. And that's why I came to the University of North Carolina. That's why I've been able to do some of the things successfully over my professional career. And Miss Lil, I first met her when she was I think we had her on one of the public affairs programs when I was running the local radio station in town. And everyone I talked to wanted to know, have you met Miss Lilly? Have you met her? She's a wonderful educator. She's a wonderful person. When I met her, she personified class and integrity. And she was one of the most caring people I've ever met. I've gotten to know Angela and Ricky and Karen a little bit. And I've been petitioning to get into the family. I keep getting voted out. But I am so honored to participate in this historical society recognition of Howard and Lillian. Thank you both for having such incredible character when you didn't know I was watching. Thank you.
We think we have the video now. I did say we thought we had. We hope that you will be able to see two very fine videos before this evening is over. You have heard words: integrity, dignity, class, professionalism, perseverance, vision, characterizing the honorees this evening, and we expect those terms to come up again and again and stay with us. They define who they are. We now come to a very special part of a special program, our tributes to Lillian Lee. My buddy, Russell Blackwell, he's here somewhere, I believe, who was himself a pioneer in this community. Russ and I have a friendly competition over which one of us has the biggest crush on Mrs. Lee. And we have found, to our dismay, but not to our surprise, that there are a number of other gentlemen in this town who are part of the same competition. A few years ago, some members of my family were visiting from out of town, and they met her, but only once at a church service. Well, they remember her sparkling, engaging personality so well and so fondly that when I talk with them, they will ask me how our Aunt Lillian is doing. She was an educator and a leader in her community before she met her husband, and continued to be a leader herself after he was elected to public office. Of course, there is pride, honor, and some prestige in being the spouse of a well-known public figure. But there is also a cost, sometimes a very heavy cost, that has to be paid with love and understanding and patience. Sometimes she has had to hold her tongue. The same goes for the children of public figures, like Angela and Ricky and Karen, especially during times of controversy. Even though your father gets lots of praise, it's hard when you hear him criticized. And sometimes it must have seemed as though everybody in town thought that your dad's time and attention belonged to them. Angela Lee is a leader in her own right. As a very effective director of the Hayti Heritage Center in Durham, I am a great fan of her work there. She will come now and offer a tribute to her mother, and she will be followed by the remarkable historian, broadcaster, educator, and advocate for social and racial justice, Danita Mason Hogan. And after Danita, we will hear from Mr. Phil Ford of UNC and the NBA, who needs no introduction.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. So, my mom never watched soap operas. She didn't even like soap operas. So I was very surprised a few years ago when I heard my mother deliver a keynote speech that incorporated the names of several popular soap operas. To paraphrase a part of that speech went something like this. My students are all my children. For some of them, learning feels like being in dark shadows on the edge of night. But together, we will search for tomorrow. And our young and restless will discover the guided light. Inspiration comes from very unexpected places. My inspiration for standing here tonight comes from the 20th letter of the alphabet, the letter T. With the letter T, I'm going to do a countdown of most of my mom's passions as a part of my tribute to her. Number 12, talking. My mom enjoys talking, and she knows a whole lot of people, and that translates into a whole lot of talking. Number 11, telling her stories. I never tire of hearing my mom's colorful way of sharing her life's experiences, her stories, good, bad, glad, and sad. She has a wealth of stories. Number 10, taking time for others. Mama always has time for others, whether it's making phone calls to check on how people are doing, whether it's getting in the car and going to visit people to see how they're doing, whether it's preparing meals and taking them to folks, whether it's making one of her signature cakes to take to folks, whether it's sending cards or getting other people to rally together and send cards. She's always taking time for others. Number 9, tunes. She's got some favorites. Midnight Train to Georgia. Rainy Night in Georgia. Georgia on my mind. She's got a couple of others. What's love got to do with it? And I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. Number 8, timeliness. Mama is always on time because she's always early. If I ask her to meet me somewhere at 2 o'clock, I know I've got to be there at 1:45 because she's going to already be there. Right, Jamie? Number 7, Tompkins High School in Savannah. Number 6, Townsley Chapel AME Church, her family church in Savannah.
Number 5, and this is a broad category with subcategories. So number 5 is the Bingley Yard Sale, PTA Thrift Shop, Electric Slide Dance, Annual Gathering of Women event, the St. Paul AME Church Male Chorus, a full moon, and Christmas holidays. Number 4, Tina Turner. Let me tell y'all, Angela Bassett had nothing on Miss Lil when she stepped out at Chapel Hill High School wearing a leather mini skirt, denim jacket, high heels, and that Tina Turner spike wig. Number 3, the Tar Heels. Number 2, the Tigers, Chapel Hill High. And number 1, teaching. While she retired from the school system, her mom still teaches every day. She teaches by the way she lives. She teaches love, laughter, giving back, paying forward, and taking time to smell the roses. My mom is thoughtful, thankful, tenacious, tender, trusting, trusted, and truly amazing. In the words of singer and composer Lionel Richie, Mama, you're once, twice, 3 times a lady.
Good evening. I would also like to share a reflection about Mrs. Lee. Before my father began his career as a computer programmer, he was pursuing a PhD in psychology. My mother used to get on him all the time for using us as guinea pigs